Okay, I think in order to keep it on time, we're going to get started. I'm Stacy Mesteth. I work as insurance risk advisor for Voller Insurance. And we're just going to talk today a little bit about water and losses due to water and how we cover against them in the insurance world. Just a quick question. Did anybody come to the FEMA talk on Tuesday? Couple? I do want to preface this by saying I am not a representative, nor do I endeavor to be a representative for the National Weather Service. I don't have a magic 8 ball about what's going to happen. We just really want to make sure that if we do have a wet spring, that we are prepared and to talk about some of those insurances coverages. This information today, as we can tell, this was put together by a lawyer. But basically, this is for informational purposes only. I'm not going to attempt to talk about specific individual coverages in this presentation. If you do have a question for me, feel free to come up. I'll have some time after, or we can set up a time, or to talk to your licensed insurance agent. A lot of people are versed in this subject too. That being said, I'm perfectly willing, and I think it sometimes goes a little bit better. If you have a question during my presentation, put your hand up, because sometimes it's hard, especially talking about a subject that you're not as familiar with, to remember that question all the way till the end. So when I did this at the Alaris Center last week, it went really, really well. And I'll still open it up for questions at the end. But if you do have a question, because we don't have a mic, what we'll do is you can ask the question, and then I'm going to repeat it to make sure that everybody can hear what we're talking about before I answer. Okay? So, I think everybody's talked to an insurance agent that they're like, I do not understand the words coming out of your mouth. It's not the regular English. But there are many definitions when we talk about loss of water, and then within the different programs that I'm going to be talking about, there are different definitions even within those programs. Flooding, seepage, water backup are all different words that are thrown around when we talk about losses due to water, and they mean different things when you're talking about the different in types to insure against water. So when we're going to talk about 3 different types of ways to insure yourself against water loss, the first one being flood insurance through the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay, that's a federal program. That is not a private insurance company. It's a federal program. Homeowners coverage, and that is a wide, I bet you just in this room we could have 20, 25 different carriers. So the different individual coverages, I'm not going to be really addressing questions for that. Again, I'd refer you to your own agent, or if you have a specific question, to come talk to me after. And then there is a new product out there that is private flood insurance. And we're going to briefly talk about that, but those are very new products that on the market, and so we'll talk about that separately. So the National Flood Insurance Program, they have their own definition of what constitutes a flood. Okay, and I'm not going to read everything verbatim, but there is an understanding that it's a partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry area, or 2 or more properties that are adjacent from one of the following types: overflow of inland or tidal waters. We're not seeing as many tidal waters in our area here. Unusual and rapid accumulation of runoff of surface waters from any source. Mud flow. And then the last one we see a lot more, along the lakes. It's collapse of land along the shore of a lake or a body of water, a river. In Grand Forks here, we don't have as many properties right up against the river anymore. But again, the National Flood Insurance Program is that it's national. It's very diverse in what it covers, and types of water that it covers. In general, we have 2 different types of flooding in our region: river flooding, and then the flash flooding. And the flash flooding can include those things that we talk about with the overland flooding. And so those are very different things. A lot of people here, I hear it quite often, well, I don't live near the river, I don't need to worry about that. That isn't where we always have 100% of our worry. I'll say it once and I'll probably say it multiple times throughout the presentation. You don't need to live near a water source in order to have flooding. I think the gentleman from FEMA said it really, really well. You don't have to have a national disaster in order for it to be a disaster for you. And that's why we want to talk about these options, so that you can have a little bit of a base knowledge to go and talk to that insurance agent to figure out whether or not any of these options are going to be for you. So some points to remember with the National Flood Insurance Program. National Flood Insurance, the NFIP, rates policies on two main components. So location and flood history. Many are aware that the NFIP has flood maps and rate according to those maps. So you can be an X, an AE. There's a lot of different letters that are thrown around for that. What those mainly, as far as rating, do have to do is the more mitigation your community has done, the more discounts as a consumer you receive. Okay? So depending on where your location is and the flood zone that you're in, the mitigation that has gone against, our dikes, our levees here, and in different communities, whether they have done any form, it is goes into the rating of what your personal policy would cost or your commercial policy would cost. And then flood history. And this is one of the ways it's a little bit confusing. The National Flood Insurance Program, when they're talking about the building that you are attempting to insure, they're not talking about the flood history of how long you have personally owned it. They are talking about the history of that building, okay? So they say that if in any 10-year period that has had more than one paid claim, it is going to take you out of that preferred rating system, which is the lowest amount you to pay in premium, and put you into the standard. If you have more than one paid claim in any 10-year period. So let me just do an example, okay? If your home was built in 1954 and in 1992 you or anybody that owned that property had a paid flood claim, that's one. If in then 1997, because that's in one 10-year period, they had another, you've had two paid claims in a 10-year period, whether or not you own that property. First question is, well, how on earth am I supposed to know that? My house was built in 1907. Happens very regularly. One second, I'm just going to finish this point and then I'll get to you. So that happens very regularly. The NFIP, what they will do is they will allow you to pay your premium in the preferred rate, but they do a search of your property. If it does come up that your property has more than the one, they will give you two options. You will either be able to pay up to that standard rate and receive the same amount of coverage, or the original amount that you paid in your premium, you would get the amount of coverage that that premium would cover. I'm sure it's not crystal clear, but kind of makes sense on a base level? Okay, sir.
What if you have a new home on a lot that flooded?
It covers the building.
Okay, so that I'd have no claim then, even though the lot I'm on flooded in 97 and that home was destroyed.
I don't like to talk to specifics about yours personally, but it follows the building. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
So if you had flooding in your home in 97, that would be like a one straight disaster?
So the question, and I apologize because I'm supposed to be repeating the questions back here. So the question was, if you had flooding in 1997 and had one paid claim, that does count as one paid claim. Okay? There can be and a lot of people have questions about checks. You know, I got multiple checks. You know, if that's one occurrence, and I am going to say, I'm going to preface that by saying most of the time, every single person, you know, we'd do a check on every single person, or the NFIP does, I'm sorry, not as an agent, you wouldn't do that. But one claim, but if you had another one in 02, okay, that's in any 10-year period, okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so again, just on the second point, it doesn't matter, it's the total age of your home, not just how long you've personally owned it. Okay, so for residential properties, you can purchase up to, in the regular program, regular NFIP program, you can buy up to $250,000 in coverage for the building and up to $100,000 in personal property coverage. Okay, on a commercial, yes, sir.
I gotta go back to that 10-year period again.
Okay.
Is that any 10-year period from the time the building was built, or is it from present back 10 years?
No, so his question was, is it in any 10-year period or from the present back 10 year? It is any 10-year period. So if a claim is in 2002, but you hadn't had a claim before that, that starts a 10-year period from 2002 until 2012. Okay, but if you had one in 1977 and 1997, that's not two in the same 10-year period. Okay. Okay.
It's gotta be within a 10-year.
A 10-year period. Mm-hmm. So for commercial properties, there's up to $500,000 in building coverage and up to $500,000 in content coverage. Okay. There is, and this is a very important thing to remember, and why we're having these talks, why the emergency management wanted to have these now versus, you know, in end of February. There is a 30-day waiting period for a policy to be in effect after the flood coverage has been purchased or modified. I always want to bring that up because some people have, you know, they carry a policy year to year, but maybe their home was only, you know, they only thought they needed $200,000 or $100,000 in building coverage. And have just always carried that over. And so this year they're thinking, you know, I think I want to purchase up. There's still a 30-day wait in that. Okay. I am going to add this in. One thing about the mortgage, in the case of a mortgage closing, that 30-day wait is not in effect. Okay.
As far as the mortgage closing goes, what about refinancing?
Okay, that's a really good question. She asked about mortgage closings, but actually about refinancing. I am going to say that the NFIP is aware that in the past that has been used to circumvent a 30-day waiting period. So they are going to be a little bit more picky about that. Like an email from your banker isn't necessarily going to satisfy that you're just happen to decide that you're on April 10th that you're going to refinance your home. I guess I wasn't in the business then, but I do believe that was maybe an issue 24 years ago. So, yes.
One more question about that. So you said when you have an increase of coverage, the standard 30-day wait applies. Does that apply to the whole amount or just that increased portion?
From my understanding, she's asking whether or not the increased portion that you're requesting. So let's do an example. If you are requesting that your coverage goes from 100,000 to 250,000 in building coverage, she's asking whether or not it's, if you have the 30-day wait for just the increased portion or for the full amount. It is my understanding that it is for just the increased portion. So if in that 30 days you had a loss, you would still have the original 100,000 coverage amount. Okay? Okay, and then to the all-time favorite, is coverage for basements is limited, okay? I'm gonna preface this by saying this is the National Flood Insurance Program. We are a little bit weird up here. We like to live in our basements. We have a lot of stuff in our basements, right? And Matt from FEMA on Tuesday went over it really, he had a good, basically his point was, in order to manage costs, they did have to limit coverage in a basement because it affects fewer people. Okay, that being said, there is not no coverage. That's maybe not a good way to say it. My mom would be very upset about that. There is still coverage in the basement. Okay, so let's go over this a little bit. Personal property. Okay, so we're just talking about personal property. Washer, dryer, food freezer, food in that freezer, and then some air conditioners as long as they're plugged in their appropriate working, you know, they're not back on a shelf somewhere. Those are covered, okay, as far as personal property. But then we also have the building coverage, and that is where your water heater, your HVAC system, any mechanical, others, you know, hydrostatic, HVAC, yeah, so your furnace, hydrostatic pumps, any machinery or mechanical function that helps run your building. Okay, so your electrical box. So if it can be in there, some people have boilers.
Outlets?
The outlets in the, in the wall.
Are your furnaces, electrical boxes, water heaters, which are they covered?
So he was asking about the furnace, water heater, electrical box. Those are covered under the building coverage.
Okay.
Okay, and so it would come out of your building coverage limit. Actually, in the application, if you apply for it, they actually do go through and ask for on your furnace and your water heater the worth and what you have in your basement. Yes, sir.
Of course, common question, comment in Grand Forks is I never had water in my basement. I do now. What about, just getting the thing cleaned up, the floor, damage to the floor? You're talking about, for lack of a better word, machine instruments, things that are run off of electricity in most cases. But you're not talking, of course, about damage that just occurs to the floor, getting the place cleaned up, mold, that sort of
Okay,
stuff.
so he's asking about whether or not there's coverage for cleaning. There is, okay? Helping clean. There's also, we haven't gone into drywall. Drywall is also covered, and then, but it's not covered to finish tape and mudding. In the basement is covered just to hang it.
So the follow-up to that is that's one of those extra policies that you would purchase besides your regular federal program. I think that's what you're saying. Or am I missing
Nope, nope, those are actually covered. So the cleaning is a part of your National Flood Insurance Program. That is a coverage in there about cleaning up. Matt brought, the FEMA gentleman brought up, and I don't have this in my presentation, but one of the other coverages is there's a separate sublimit of $1,000. You do not have to have, if you go out and you are doing your own prevention measures, there is up to $1,000, even if you don't have a loss, but because you went out and you attempted to you put a pump in to pump water away, and this wouldn't be as much in town, but if it property outside of town with a pump, or there was other things you did with sandbags, or lumber is covered, and up to $1,000 is covered, even if you don't have a loss, if you try to prevent a loss. Okay, sir.
What about, and you said even if you don't have a loss, what if you hire movers to move personal items out of your basement up to your main floor, and you don't have a loss? Are you compensated for the cost of doing that? Because you actually are preventing a loss, even though you don't have one.
So the question was, is the cost of having someone help move property from the basement up to a further floor, or maybe even outside of your property? There is coverage. He had a further point whether or not if you have that coverage, if there isn't a loss. I'm going to get back to you on that one. We'll have the answer before the end of the presentation. So there is coverage for moving property away, but I'm just going to have to double check on that. Okay. I want to say something, but I'm not going to say something.
Right.
Sir.
Structural damage, like to the walls or the floor. Is that covered?
So there is structural, I mean, that goes right into the building. That's covered under your building coverage. He's actually structural damage. You know, if you were to have a basement cave-in, that is covered under your building coverage. Okay? Ma'am?
Yeah, I don't think we answered it. Is carpet covered?
Okay, the question is carpet covered in a basement. Carpet is not covered in a basement. No floor coverings are covered in a basement, okay? It's just one of those things that they limited. I mean, again, we're right now talking about the basement. Those rules change once you get up to your main floor, okay? Other questions about the basement? Ma'am?
An outdoor sump. Does that cover that?
Okay. It's an interesting thing. This is kind of a newer thing. She was talking about an external sump pump. Okay? That is still a little bit undecided right now. They're newer. The popularity is newer. So if you were talking about it in a way that said, well, this is what I did to prevent this flood, did you just put one in? There's a lot of different variables in that, so I can't just say 100% yes. But that is something to bring up to in an individual excuse me, meeting, and to literally talk to somebody that your agent would be able to literally call in and get specifications for that. Because again, there would be some time limit, like when did you put that in? How are you trying? Was there a loss? Were you trying to do it in a preventative way? Any other questions on this before we? Yes, ma'am.
Question about what he was talking about, you know, about like cleaning, sheetrock and hanging, lumber, mold in the basement. Is that under the dwelling, under the national program?
It's under the building coverage. She was asking about cleaning, and there are some separate with cleaning and preventative measures that have separate sublimits as well, meaning that there's a maximum amount you can get. I do know if you do have help that doing something, if you do have help, they will pay the federal minimum wage to help cover some of those labor costs if you're not doing it yourself. I know, we don't know a lot of people that work for minimum wage, yes.
And tell people to fill up their basement because if they pump it out during a flood, that's up over the house's foundation.
Oh, we can talk about that after.
In, you know, it'll pressure it in and you'll lose your whole basement. The pressure from the outside, static pressure.
Oh, hydrostatic pressure. So hydrostatic pressure as a cause of loss is listed as, hydrostatic pressure is an interesting one, and it's one that's come up in our office multiple times this week. It's not 100% clear, although it is covered. We have to always go back to that definition of flood, okay? 2 or more properties adjacent. Adjacent is not adjoining, it is near. So is it one of those reasons, you know, we always say the reason for buying a flood insurance is not thinking to, or any type of insurance, to cover a specific circumstance or a specific thought process about what it do. I mean, it is literally there for protection and, you know, some peace of mind. Hydrostatic pressure is one that it is a covered cause of loss, but would it, in every circumstances, it's not a blanket, if that makes sense. If anybody has any questions about hydrostatic pressure, please come to me and we can talk about that after.
And then the people that just pumped it out too fast after.
There were definitely some issues with it in 97. So I'm going to move on to, because I bet you we could have a basement coverage hour conversation, and I'm happy to answer questions on it at the end as well, or individually too. One of the things that I like to point out, because we do have a lot of condominium forms of ownership in this area, and if you live in a condominium form of home, you'll want to find out whether or not your association carries coverage. Okay? Every association and their bylaws are different, so you want to make sure if they cover it, what their bylaws are, where you're responsible as a unit owner to cover as far as studs in, that sort of thing. So, and then also too, if your association does carry coverage, there is, through the National Flood Insurance Program, if you also as a unit owner cover or purchase a policy, there's a primary secondary relationship that then goes on. Okay, so again, when you're going to talk to somebody, it's a good question to ask your association, because before you actually purchase your purchase a National Flood Insurance Program policy, you'll want to make sure that you have that knowledge. Okay. And then the last one's really important too. Your community does have to be a participating community in order to buy flood insurance with the National Flood Insurance Program. I can tell you, Grand Forks is a participating community. Okay, but if you do live in an outlying community, make sure that you know that. Sir?
Well, I was just asking, is that just the city or is it the county of Grand Forks?
The county, the entire county is covered as community, participating community. I apologize. No, I shouldn't say that. As far as, there's different cities within the county that may not be covered. So if you live within a city in the county, please make sure with your city. Okay? So.
Is East Grand Forks covered?
Asking if East Grand Forks is covered. East Grand Forks is covered. Yeah.
Ma'am, is there a definition in the insurance world of what is deemed to be a basement? Is it anything
Yes.
below grade, or is it something more technical than that?
He's asking about definitions of what defines a basement. There is definite, and those can get into very specific, but I am going to say a basement, and if we have particular questions about yours, feel free to ask, but if we get too into it, we might have to break apart after and talk about them. A basement is below grade on all sides. We did have a question on Tuesday regarding whether or not a walkout basement, and questions about that. If it is, and I will do this one just because it has a question often. Okay, so it talks about the grade. So if you're thinking, if you think, okay, well, I've got a basement and it has a walkout, okay, in the back, maybe it walks out to the patio. How it decides whether or not it's below grade on all sides and with that walkout in mind is, does the grade fall away at the end of it? Some people have specific basements that do have a little bit of walkout, but then you have to walk up steps to get out, and the grade is still higher. That would still be constituted as a basement. Okay? Then there are some other questions. We have I've talked with a lot of people recently, and there's also a difference between a subgrade crawl space as well. And those can have so many variations, I will not get into that. If you have a specific question, feel free to come to me, but we could have charts and we would still have, we do have charts and we still have questions. So. Yeah, no, and that is something you do want to specify because it does change the price of your premium. That being said, whether it changes the price of your premium $20, $30, that's not really, I'm not going to say that that's not important. But what is important is that if you go ahead and buy a policy, that it's correct so that the time that, God forbid you do have a claim, that you're covered correctly. Okay? Especially when we talk about coverage for basements is limited. Okay? And please ask those questions, especially we've got a lot of multi-level homes. And I did just have a question recently that, they thought if they brought it from their deepest basement up to their next knot, but they didn't call their next one a basement. But as far as the National Flood Insurance Program was, sometimes in these multi-level homes, you can have multiple basements according to the National Flood Insurance Program. So again, make sure that that is something that you are questioning the insurance agent that you're talking to. Okay? Okay. That is my, I'm not going to say quick, but that was my kind of overlay of the National Flood Insurance Program. I'm not going to close questions on it right now because basically I'm going to go into another area that's going to probably bring up more questions for you. But anything specifically about the NFIP before I move on to some homeowners coverage? Okay. So, sad truth about my industry. Insurance companies state what they're going to cover in those deck pages, those first few pages that you're like, okay, this is about me and my home. Then if you keep reading, as everybody does, because everybody here has read their homeowner's policy from the front to the back, then they're going to go and say, but we're going to exclude this. Then if you keep reading and get all the way to the end of that super interesting document, they might endorse some coverage back on. So it is very good at this point in time, at this juncture, not waiting till March, to have a grasp and make us insurance agents work for our money. I'm sure I'm going to have some insurance agents in the room, and they're like, oh no. But it is very important. This brings me into why we're talking about it. Majority of homeowners policies, or for that matter, commercial policies, exclude flood as a covered cause of loss. Okay? And then people say, well, then why are you talking about it today? Well, we're going into, and not my own thing, but to listen to the National Weather Service, a possible wet spring. Okay? If it is not deemed a flood, if it does not fit the National Flood Insurance Program's definition of a flood, you can still have loss from water that comes up for your sewer and your drains. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about. It can be put in there as an endorsement. So this is what I really want everybody, I challenge everybody to go. If you're a homeowner, if you're a business owner, if you are a tenant, if you have property to cover, go and talk to who insures you and say, where am I? Do I have water backup, sewer, and drains? Okay? The reason being is, you may have it, but how much do you have? Okay? Because if this is not flood and the coverage comes as sewer, water, and backup, and just overwhelms and comes up out of your drains, there is basement coverage. So you want to make sure, is it going to cover my, is that enough to cover everything? I mean, we think of furnaces and water heaters, but in your basement, again, we went into the fact that we live in our basements, a lot of us. So again, making sure you understand that coverage on your homeowners or your commercial policy. Okay? And these are kind of just some examples of what they could look like, the endorsements. Okay? They very typically come in $5,000 increments. But every company is a little bit different. So some companies have a 30-day wait, some have a 15-day wait, some have no wait, some only allow you to change or increase coverage at renewal. So now's the time to find that out, not in April. Okay?
On that too, some companies, if you buy it, they require you to have a battery backup sump pump or a generator on site.
So this she was talking about whether some companies require different things in order, maybe some improvements. Absolutely, every homeowner's coverage reads just a little bit different, and especially when it comes to endorsements, which again is where they add coverage back onto your policy. And so you want to make sure, what does that cover? What do I need to do to get that coverage? Have you had a loss lately? The one thing too, and a word that you'll hear is a moratorium. Okay, moratoriums can be put out for private companies and they just choose in a certain area, we're not allowing you to change anything after this date. We saw those last year. Okay? We saw them, and you know, my personal thought process is we could see them even earlier this year. So again, the time is now to go bug those insurance agents and say, where am I on stuff?
You know, during the flood of 97, we upped our coverage to 10,000 because they told us we needed flood insurance, so we upped the sum up. Okay, after 97, they would only, they wrote it for 5,000. They will not write it for more than 5,000. Is that, I mean, is that just a certain insurance group's policy, or can you demand or inquire?
I think probably inquiring would always work out better. But she's asking whether or not she had a personal issue of after the 97 flood that they bought up to 10,000. Pardon me? Oh, prior had bought up to 10,000, but had found with her particular or one particular insurance company that they were only offering $5,000. I'm going to say that is definitely an individual insurance company procedure. You know, again, talk. I mean, things change in 24 years. Talk again to them. And then, you know, we do have, a lot of options in this town. So, you know, if that's not something you're comfortable with, that is something that, you know, you as a free market person can go out and check.
Kind of off of hers, but say if your insurance company just doesn't cover water backup or sewers, can you go buy that from a different company?
Okay, so she's, we have a question saying if your insurance company doesn't offer water sewer backup, I do not know of any instance where it's a standalone policy. That does not mean that that is not the case. So, you know, that is one thing coverage-wise you'd want to check into, because I definitely can't speak for the millions of insurance companies it seems like that are out there. I have not personally heard of a standalone water backup policy, because an endorsement just means endorsing onto a current policy that's a standalone. But that's just me, so I would definitely check out there. Check that out.
You can only have insurance for one company, right?
To cover your, okay. That's a complicated question. She asked if you can only have one insurance company cover a property. That can get into a lot of different issues with me saying yes or no, and my lawyer's right there, so she only lets me say certain things. But one of those things is that, I mean, there is no easy, I don't feel comfortable answering that because, I mean, again, we have National Flood Insurance Program that goes along, which is a different insurance entity than your personal. And you can have commercial coverage and a homeowner's, I mean, so that's not, can have one company that provides you excess coverage. So that's not a simple answer. So that would maybe be something we could talk about after. Okay, and if anybody else had any questions about that. Okay. So we've gone over most of this. Most often, so homeowners policy with exceptions of those of private insurance companies that we'll talk about after, exclude coverage from flooding. This covers water. This type of coverage covers water that comes up through our sewers and our drains. Most often comes up in $5,000 increments. One thing that you want to be clear when you're talking to your agent, is there a separate deductible that applies? And again, we talked about that moratorium word. Okay? Again, you want to talk if there is any limitations. We had a question about limitations of if they needed a certain sewer, something with their sump pump, a battery backup, things like that. But those time ones are what we really care about right now. Making sure, are there any time limitations on your personal homeowners? Okay? Any questions about this as we move? Okay? Okay, so we're getting into some private flood coverage, and I am going to do very basics about this because A, it is new coverage. Okay, so there are some private flood, private companies that do provide some flood coverage. Okay, either as an endorsement or a standalone policy. First point that I want to put out on that is if you are mandated to have flood because of your mortgage, your banker says you have to have flood coverage. Quite often some of these private options do not satisfy those requirements, so check with that. 2, coverage is not always written on the same forms as an NFIP. So what we just spent the first half an hour talking about is NFIP coverage. Those are not necessarily the same forms that private coverage would be written on. Okay? So we want to make sure about that. If it's written as an endorsement, some companies have an endorsement that you can literally put a flood endorsement onto your homeowner's policy, like a water sewer backup. Okay? You want to check about the limits of that. They're not necessarily the same limits as your home coverage, your coverage A in your home policy or your package policy for a commercial. Okay? And then also too, if your neighbor got it one day and then you're looking at it the next day, their moratoriums are very big on private flood coverage. Grand Forks, for a few companies, Grand Forks was in a moratorium all of the fall. I mean, most of last year, all of the fall, all the way, and then popped up like a couple of days ago. But then, you know, it's only certain coverages and certain locations that they'll accept. So again, it doesn't have the same rules as the National Flood Insurance Program. Think of it as a completely different thing. Okay? That's it. I mean, we just want people to think about coverage. Think about coverage now, not think about coverage when we're going on the 3rd or 4th update about our potential flooding. And as we learned last year, it's not just a spring problem for us. So we just want to make sure of those things. So I'm going to ask some questions. Ma'am.
I don't know if I missed it, but deductibles for national flood insurance. Deductible for the building and deductible for personal property.
Okay, so she brought up deductibles. So building, and even if you get them on the same quote, there's 2 different coverages, building and personal property. They both have their own deductible. I'm not going to go into what they are. There are some standardized deductibles, but depending on the coverage limit that you do choose, those deductibles could be different. Okay, and they're also different in the standard versus the preferred rating. Okay.
I still question what's called flood. Last fall, a 5-inch rain. In this part of Grand Forks where the storm drains couldn't handle it. And I guess there was people where the water got high enough to run in their basement windows. Is that considered a flood?
He was asking about the rain event, he used an example as the rain event last year. In some cases, in some cases in different parts of the city, it was considered a flood. It met all of those qualifying factors to make it a flood in the NFIP. Was it a flood just all blanket? Okay. Not at the time, no.
Okay.
Okay?
How long is the coverage? 6 months, 12 months?
He asked how long the coverage is. If we're talking about a National Flood Insurance Program, the National Flood Insurance Program, when you receive your premium, that is for a year. Okay? That's a 1-year-long policy. Okay? I do want to bring this up for anybody that does have flood policies currently in force. If you're wondering, well, what do I need to do this year? You know, if you were a first-time owner or buyer last year, pay your premium. They're going to send you a notification in about 60 days in advance. Pay that premium. Don't let it lapse. Okay? Because if you let it lapse, you have that 30-day wait again. Okay? Other questions? Sir?
Maybe just a general question, ma'am, more what those who were here in 97 faced, the city sanitary and sewage system got overwhelmed. And that was really the cause for many residents, the flooding they experienced. Can you maybe give us some advice or direction on, and as a homeowner, do we need flood insurance? Should we be looking at our homeowners insurance for added protection from that?
Okay.
Will the city cover that? You know, we found back in '97 that wasn't the case, but.
We've got some city representatives. So he had a question about, in '97, we had some issues with the sewer backup, or the sewer system, water systems in the city that led to some more issues with flooding. And should we be buying, but if you're worried about that, should you be buying flood insurance or looking at your homeowners? Basically, as an individual that is a homeowner or a business owner, I think now is the time to look, whether you're worried about specific claims because of things that the city has done or worries about 1997, or you're just watching the weather and you're worried about that, okay? Now is the time to look into it as an individual, as a business owner, to see about protection. Individual claims can't be something that hinder buying the thought process, because in that case, you really just need to make that decision as a property owner, and a property owner meaning, even if you are a tenant in your building, but if you own property, now is the time to be looking at that. That's why I wanted to cover homeowners and National Flood Insurance Program, because you want to look at both things, because we can't say what's going to happen. This gentleman's question about the rain. Some ended up being covered under their NFIP policy, some covered under their homeowners. So we don't know. We just need to make sure that we are as informed as we can be, and then to make that decision personally, how you're going to cover your property, your family's property, okay? And again, starting to do it now so that, we're not in all a mad rush, whenever. Yes?
Who makes the determination about your loss or total loss? Who does that?
He asked who makes the determination for
National program.
the national. They have their own adjusters that come out, and that's who makes the determination.
So let's say you have a total loss. Let's say your home is toast. You're paid to the limit of your coverage, less a deductible or something.
Okay, so he had a question about if you did have a total loss, and what would be covered. So covered up to your limits of coverage, minus the deductible, like you said. Okay, there are some other programs through FEMA, but this is the National Flood Insurance Program. I think we get the first one, then I'll come back, sir, or ma'am.
Regarding the National Flood Insurance Program, maybe this should be an obvious question, but can you increase the coverage above and beyond what you bought your policy for if you want extra protection?
Okay, so he had a question, and first of all, there is no obvious questions in insurance, so never feel that you shouldn't be asking these questions. You are the person that's purchasing, and don't ever feel like you shouldn't be asking these questions.
Insurance, because FEMA will be broke.
Well, so the question was if you can purchase it up from an original amount, and we did talk about that you can increase up to the $250,000 to building coverage in a residence.
$250,000.
Yep, and $100,000 in contents coverage for a residence, and that $500,000 for a personal property. For a commercial property, and $500,000 for a business personal property in a commercial property. Okay.
You can get excess flood.
Okay, so I was going to say that. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a good point that people know. You can get excess policies outside of the NFIP. You can get private coverage above and beyond those. But again, know that that's in a private market. Okay, sir?
What happens if you have the national flood insurance, but you're physically unable to protect your place? You can't sandbag or...
So he asked if you're not physically able to protect your home, you have a national flood insurance program. There isn't a mandate that you have to go and, I mean, if you're not physically able to go out and sandbag, if you have a loss due to that, I mean, you're not mandated as a part as you're not saying I'm signing up to, to lift as many sandbags as I can. No, that is not a part of, you have no, I guess the word would be duty to defend your property. You don't have that with the National Flood Insurance Program. Good question. Ma'am.
Do you think since 97, FEMA and our homeowners have gotten more critical?
The question was, do I think that since 1997, FEMA and homeowners have gotten more critical? I mean, I don't think that I have a place in answering that, really. I mean, have they changed? Yes. I can say that. They have changed.
Because they were wonderful in 97 for us, both of them.
Right, and I still
That's
think,
what I'm saying.
and she said, is it wonderful? And I still feel like, I think that it's a great program. I mean, otherwise, if we didn't have the National Flood Insurance Program, most of us wouldn't have coverage because we either, don't have access to a private market that we can afford or available to us because of moratoriums. So, I do think that coverage is a wonderful part. Did we have another question back? Yes, ma'am.
So we live quite a ways from the river. Our house is supposed to be a little higher grade or shallower basement. Doesn't currently have a sump pump. When we bought it, it didn't have a sump pump. They say they've never had a water problem. But with the water table this high, if you get something just from seepage, that's normally not something that would be covered by flood, or it's not a backup. So where would something like that's just kind of a gray area that just maybe not insurable?
So she was asking about a gray area with I think probably in reference to homeowners and National Flood Insurance Program. And talking about your specific, I can't talk to your specific circumstance. But yes, I obviously can't speak on behalf of a National Flood Insurance Program adjuster. I just can't. What would be what would be qualified as a covered loss or not? That being said, seepage is not, it's an exception to an exclusion. There we go with that insurance speak again, with the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay? So it's a little bit different from your homeowners, and I just stepped in a whole lot of things when I brought that up. But it is what they classify as an exception to an exclusion in the NFIP policy. Okay? And again, I want to say I'm talking about the NFIP policy. I always hesitate to bring that up because it brings with it some, well, what does seepage mean? And that is, we could go through 1,000 different examples right now, and one would not be covered. So that's just one thing to know when people, throw out those words. That is one that is a little bit different with the National Flood Insurance Program. Okay, ma'am.
So does an individual buy either through the NFIP or your homeowners, or is it one and the same?
She asked whether you buy through the NFIP or your homeowners. So are you asking who you would buy the NFIP coverage through?
Is it one and the same?
No, NFIP coverage is a whole separate policy. Most insurance agents are able to sell it. So, I mean, you can talk to your insurance agent and talk to them about their thought process on it. But NFIP policies are separate from your homeowner's coverage. Ma'am. Sorry, back there, and then I'll come back up to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry to take you back to it, but exactly, when you say an exception to an exclusion,
I know.
seepage is basically excluded, but then they make exceptions depending on...
It's that tricky insurance talk again. Yes, there is an exception. Seepage is covered. but seepage doesn't always mean the exact same thing. It still has to be that flood definition to be in there. But the way different people describe, we can talk about that a little bit. Talk to your insurance, talk to an NFIP insurance agent about that too. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm a little confused. So my homeowners was not purchased through Waller. But I can go to Waller or any company to buy flood insurance?
As long as they're comfortable in selling. If they asked who you can go to, you don't know. You don't have to just obviously just come to me, and that is not my point in doing these. But yeah, I had the sweater. But no, lots of insurance agents are capable and comfortable with selling National Flood Insurance Program policies. It's not just from one
I guess that was
standalone.
my first question. I don't have to go to my insurance company that doesn't have a personal representative in town to buy flood insurance.
No, absolutely. If you buy it, say, from somebody in your hometown and you would rather have somebody here to sit down and talk to, no, they do not have to be by the same agent.
Okay.
Yep. Ma'am.
We were talking about like building
Yeah.
and then
Well,
personal.
What I missed is Dave.
She's got a washer and dryer and stuff that's pretty old. Would it be replacement value of that, or is it?
That's a great question. She's asking about personal property, whether or not it's replaced on a replacement cost base or an actual cash value base. Okay, so in the basement is an actual cash value for your personal property. Okay, if you insure on the building side of things, on the building coverage, so you have furnace, water heater, if you insured a value to at least 80% or the maximum that you can get through the NFIP. So again, let's just talk about homeowners, for example. If your homeowners, the replacement cost on the homeowners is $300,000, okay? And you have a loss, whether or not they'll pay it on a replacement cost or an actual cash value, is if you have insured it up to at least 80% of the value or the maximum amount you can get. Because the reason why they say or is if you have a $600,000 home, obviously you can't purchase 80% through the National Flood Insurance Program. So either 80% of your building's value or the maximum amount through the National Flood Insurance Program, then those building coverages would be at a replacement cost. Okay, but the personal property in the basement is actual cash value. Okay? Okay, feel free, I have some cards out if anybody wants to contact me for a question. Otherwise, please contact your agents.
I believe it was the gentleman in the hoodie that asked about the moving the property.
Oh, yeah.
If it's in that image.